Okay, hello. I'm ToeGrinder. I'm a Mage Theory Crafting contributor and expert in the Mage Discord. I'm the developer, maintainer, and guide writer of the MageHub.com website. In-game, I'm the raid leader and guildmaster of the guild Mist, Taran Mill EU, where I've achieved a plethora of Hall of Flame titles and Mythic Plus Rank 1 titles. I'm going to be linking my written guide on MageHub.com in the description. It's updated every day. Always check it for the most up-to-date rotation and talents. And for the purposes of this video, I am going to assume that you know what your spells do. If you don't, go check the written guide. Hopefully this is highly anticipated, so let's just jump right in. So I'm going to start with the raid talent build in the class tree, prioritizing mostly defensives and utility throughout the tree. The only thing you need to really worry about is picking up all the damage talents, which is Overflowing Energy, Ice Nova, Rune of Power, the 2 stat buffs, and then you have your choice between your capstones. Meteor is terrible and you should never play it in any situation. You should always play Shifting Power, and your choice between Temporal Warp and Time Anomaly is basically dictated by when you lust. I think you can play Temporal Warp on basically every boss this tier, but you can play Time Anomaly if your Bloodlust timings are a little bit awkward or if you Bloodlust quite late into the fight. In the spec tree, for the most part, it's fairly cookie cutter. I do recommend you play Cauterize. The first section of the tree, there's not a huge amount of choice, but if you want, you can drop Cauterize for this point here in Call of the Sun King, and then everything else will just stay the same. Out of your capstones, technically Hypothermia is the best on single target, but I usually don't recommend it because Fiery Rush adds a lot of consistency while only being slightly behind. And in addition to that, it provides more burst damage, which is good for damage phases or high priority adds, and gets a bit better with downtime. The rest of the tree, I basically recommend you never play anything on the right side of the tree. Flamestrike and Living Bomb are a little bit too undertuned right now. Improved Scorch is technically better for pure execute damage, but because of fight design and Vault of the Incarnates, it's actually not that good because a lot of fights, even though they get intense towards the end, damage at all phases in the fight usually contributes to killing the boss faster in the last phase. So execute damage is a little bit weaker this tier than it usually is. So I recommend you go with this build without Cauterize, or you take the point here if you want to play Cauterize. Okay, moving on to dungeon talents. I'll start with the class tree. I drop a few of the low impact talents like Winter's Protection and Shielding to pick up a lot of the active utility. So things like Spell Steal, Remove Curse are your important dispels. You don't need them in every dungeon, but I recommend you pick them up and learn over time which dungeons you don't need them in, and you can drop them because it's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them. The other 2 important talents are Blast Wave and Dragon's Breath. These are what you use to stop important casts that can't be counterspelled. Over in the spec tree, it's basically exactly the same as Raid because a lot of your damage comes from spreading Ignite and not using your AOE abilities. A lot of the choices I mentioned in the Raid section, like Improved Scorch, dropping Cauterize, I really don't recommend. This is a single target talent. Cauterize is hugely valuable in dungeons because of a lot of the random damage, and it's a longer period of time that you have to go without making a mistake if you want to be timing keys. And never play Hypothermia because it's a single target talent. While it gives you a combustion-like effect, it doesn't actually give you combustion, so you don't get the buffed Ignite damage that you would from something like Sun King's Blessing or just your regular combustion. There are 2 things that you need to focus on to maximize damage as Fire Mage. So the first is maximizing your hot streak generation, and the second is maximizing your damage during combustion. So starting out with maximizing hot streak generation, hot streak's achieved by critting twice in a row. You get 1 crit, it gives you Heating Up, which doesn't do anything on its own, but if you crit again with Heating Up, you get Hot Streak, which makes your next Pyroblast or Flamestrike instant, which is where a lot of your damage comes from. So essentially, the Fire Mage filler follows a cycle. You cast Fireball until 1 crits and gives you Heating Up. You use Fire Blast, which always crits to convert the Heating Up into a Hot Streak, and then you consume the Hot Streak using Pyroblast. So by the time that the first Fireball that crits reaches the target, you'll already be casting another Fireball. That's fine. You don't cancel the cast, you just continue to cast. You can use Fire Blast while casting, and then you consume the Hot Streak at the end of the cast with a Pyroblast. We always want to cast a non-instant spell before an instant Pyroblast. That's almost always Fireball, but sometimes it's Pyroblast because of Pyroclasm, so that both spells hit at the same time. This is because there's a small grace window where if one of those spells crits and the other doesn't, we don't lose the Heating Up from the spell that crit. Do keep in mind this doesn't work with Scorch because Scorch has a faster travel time, so keep that in mind if you're moving or you're using Searing Touch or something like that. So just letting you see that in action, I'm just going to keep casting Fireball until one crits, and then I'm going to Fire Blast and then Pyroblast at the end of the cast. Got another one, Fire Blast, Pyroblast. And you'll find that because you're casting 2 spells at the end, that one of them is quite likely to crit, and you'll kind of keep chaining. If you run out of Fire Blasts, don't worry, just keep casting Fireball, and eventually your Fire Blasts will come back. And then Fire Blast here in the middle of the cast, and then Pyroblast at the end. Combustion is arguably the most important thing that you need to learn as a Fire Mage in order to do good damage. So it's our main DPS cooldown, it gives us 100% crit, and it requires a small amount of setup. In order to maximize the damage during Combustion, we want to minimize the amount of hard casting we do and just chain instant casts. This means we want to enter Combustion with as many charges of Fire Blast and as many charges of Phoenix Flames as possible, and this pulling logic also applies to combustions that you gain via Sun King's Blessing. So an ideal combustion is just chaining instant casts. Every Pyroblast you cast will give you heating up, so you only need to cast one more spell to gain Hot Streak. This additional spell should alternate between Fire Blast and Phoenix Flames to maintain the Feel of Burn buff. In Combustion, we want to sort of front load our Fire Blasts to get to as high stacks of Feel the Burn as possible, and then just use Fire Blast as infrequently as possible to maintain that buff throughout Combustion. If you consume a Sun King's Blessing while in Combustion, it'll add 6 seconds to your current Combustion. However, if you cast Combustion while one is already active via Sun King's Blessing, it simply resets your Combustion to its base duration of 12 seconds. Combustion should be used on cooldown as much as possible. You can do things like delay it for extra damage phases, or add spawns to take advantage of the additional Ignite Cleave, but because it's your most important spell and it's where a lot of your damage comes from, you want to be casting it on cooldown as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to start by showing you an example Combustion. I'm going to cast Fireball, and then I'm going to Fire Blast twice during the cast and activate Combustion during the cast. The reason for this is we want to start on as many Feel the Burn stacks as possible. We don't want to reach the end of Combustion and still have a Fire Blast left and think, oh, that could have been an extra Feel the Burn stack. And we want to start Combustion on a Hot Streak. So just showing you that in action. Always refreshing Feel the Burn as late as possible by casting Phoenix Flames and alternating between Phoenix Flames and Fire Blast. Whenever it comes to the usage of Rune of Power and Shifting Power, you always want to use Rune of Power with a Sun King's Blessing. The first time that you do that is usually straight after your first Combustion or very quickly after your first Combustion. And you want to use Shifting Power as close to on cooldown as possible, but you always want to make sure that Combustion is on cooldown when you use Shifting Power and that you're at low Fire Blast charges. And these things kind of go together a lot of the time, especially with Rune of Power. So usually what happens is you do your main Combustion, you'll have 8 stacks of Sun King's Blessing and no Fire Blast charges. So what you do is you'll cast Rune of Power, then afterwards you'll cast Shifting Power, which will regen your Fire Blast charges, so now you're in a Rune of Power and you have full Fire Blast charges, and now you can use the Sun King's Blessing that you gain during your Combustion and have lots of Fire Blast charges during it. So there are 2 effects that make us want to hard cast a Pyroblast. The first is Pyroclasm, which is a random chance after you consume a Hot Streak to make your next hard cast Pyroblast deal extra damage, and Sun King's Blessing, every time you consume a Hot Streak you gain a stack, and at 8 stacks your next non-instant Pyroblast or Flamestrike will grant you Combustion for 6 seconds. So in general, we want to try and line these 2 things up, but it's not always possible because Pyroclasm is random. So what essentially happens is, if you reach 6 or 7 stacks of Sun King's Blessing and you get a Pyroclasm proc, you kind of want to hold it and generate those Sun King's Blessing stacks before the Pyroclasm goes away so that you can line them up. If you get a Pyroclasm and you only have like 1 or 2 stacks of Sun King's Blessing and it's still a while away, then you can just use it normally in place of a Fireball. So what do we do with these 2 effects during Combustion? So first of all, Sun King's Blessing is the easier one. We usually want to spend Sun King's Blessing during Combustion. We'll just hardcast the Pyroblast as soon as we reach 8 stacks, and that way it extends the Combustion. Pyroclasm is a bit more complicated. Usually what we want to do if we get a Pyroclasm proc during Combustion is we want to save it for Sun King's Blessing. Because we're generating Sun King's Blessing stacks much quicker during Combustion, it's much easier to glance at your Pyroclasm duration and your Sun King's Blessing stacks and decide, is this Pyroclasm going to last until Sun King's Blessing? If it does, great, just don't use it. Get the 2 for 1 and cast it with Sun King's Blessing. If you've maybe just consumed a Sun King's Blessing, or you have 2 stacks of Pyroclasm and you're not sure what to do with it because you can't overlap it with Sun King's Blessing, then what you do is you just cast Pyroclasm at a lower priority than Fire Blast, but a higher priority than Phoenix Flames. So if you've used up your Fire Blast charges, rather than go into Phoenix Flames, you can hard cast a Pyroblast Pyroclasm instead. So I'm just going to show an example of what to do with Sun King's Blessing during the filler rotation. So I'm just going to keep casting my filler rotation as normal. I'm going to Fireball until one crits, and then I'm going to Fire Blast, and then Pyroblast at the end. I'm going to keep doing this until I reach 7 stacks of Sun King's Blessing, and then what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and generate the 8th stack naturally. And if I can, great, I'll spend it, but if I don't, and my Fire Blast is almost at 3 stacks, then I will spend it. So I essentially wait as late as possible. I'll Rune a Power because we want to save our Rune a Power for our Sun King's Blessings, and then I'm just going to go in and do a regular Combustion rotation as normal. Obviously, it's a lot shorter, and you're going to want to spend Fire Blast more aggressively to reach 3 stacks of Feel the Burn. That's essentially how you do it. I'll show it again, so I'm at 4 stacks. I'll keep spending as normal. Then as soon as I start reaching high stacks, I want to think about pulling these Fire Blasts a bit. So I'm at 7 stacks. I've not got many, so I'm just going to keep casting here, and I'm going to try and naturally reach the 8th stack, which I do. And if I do, and Rune of Power is off cooldown, I'll use it. If not, I just go in with whatever Fire Blast casts I have. You always want to wait as late as possible to convert that 8 hot streak, because you want to have as many Fire Blasts as possible for your Sun King's Blessing. I mean, you might just RNG it and crit 2 Fireballs in a row, and if you do, grand, go in. But otherwise, wait until you're nearly at 3 stacks and then go into your Sun King's Blessing. The execute filler rotation is the same as the regular filler rotation, except you replace Fireball with Scorch, which is a simple swap, but there are 2 main implications that you need to think about. The first is that you do not want to cast a hard cast Scorch before an instant Pyroblast like you do outside execute, and I'll show you why. So if I have a hot streak and I cast a Scorch and then Pyroblast at the end, you can see the Scorch hit first, guaranteed crit, gives me heating up, but then the Pyroblast hits afterwards and it's not a guaranteed crit, and if it doesn't crit, I lose the heating up. So instead what you want to do is, if you have a heating up and you're casting Scorch, you know the Scorch is going to crit, so you can just cue the Pyroblast at the end of that cast and fire the Pyroblast that way. So you always want to be casting Scorch and the Pyroblast with a heating up rather than a hot streak. The second thing is that because Scorch is a guaranteed crit, pulling for Sun King's Blessing is both easier and more consistent. So for example, I'm just spending, I'm just going to ignore other procs for now, but I get up to, let's say, 6 Sun King's Blessing stacks. I can generate these last 2 stacks pretty easily, which means I can stop using Fire Blast much earlier in execute than I would normally, so that whenever I reach 8 stacks and I go into my Sun King's Blessing, I have more Fire Blasts than I would normally have if I was not in execute. There's a couple of variations of the Fire Mage opener depending on whether or not you have Firestarter and how long Firestarter actually lasts. So if you don't have Firestarter, you don't do anything special, you just go into Combustion right away. If you do have Firestarter, and Firestarter is going to last a long time, you want to use Rune of Power first and get as many Sun King's Blessing stacks as possible. So if you're able to reach 8 stacks of Sun King's Blessing during Firestarter, great. You hard cast your Pyroblast and you enter Combustion at the end of the cast, and then that way you can combine your Sun King's Blessing Combustion and your regular Combustion together. If you're in Normal or Heroic and stuff is dying much quicker, or maybe you're in a dungeon and you can't get 8 stacks of Sun King's Blessing before Firestarter ends, then what happens is you just take whatever stacks you have and you enter Combustion and you consume the Sun King's Blessing during Combustion at 8 stacks with however long that takes. Okay, before I show you a full opener, there's just a few things that I want to explain with Temporal Warp and Double Lust. The opener gets kind of weird. So first off, you're going to be building Sun King's Blessing stacks very quickly, and your Fire Blast is going to have a very short cooldown. This means that you're going to start Combustion with a Sun King's Blessing, you're going to get a Sun King's Blessing pretty quickly into Combustion, and that means your first Combustion is going to be 24 seconds. So we're going to want to cast Rune of Power during our first Combustion, which is kind of weird, but if you think about it, you're giving up 1 global for 40% extra damage for the rest of this cast, so it's definitely worth it. And in addition, we're going to spend Fire Blasts very aggressively during Firestarter, and before we enter Combustion the first time, we're going to cast Shifting Power rather than waiting to the end of Combustion. Again, this is only during double Bloodlust, where your haste is very high, Sun King's Blessing is built very quickly, and Fire Blast has a really short cooldown. So whenever it comes to the AOE rotation, you actually want to do the exact same thing that you do in single target. The reason for this is that Fire Mage AOE spells are very undertuned right now, and how you do most of your AOE damage is through Ignite. And how you spread Ignite is Fire Blast, and how you build a big Ignite is by doing good single target damage. So the rotation on AOE is exactly the same as it is on single target. For completionist's sake, I'm going to show an example of how you would do a Flamestrike rotation in case it ever gets buffed at some point. I want to keep this video relevant, but just as a disclaimer, right now I do not recommend doing the Flamestrike rotation. So the biggest change with Flamestrike based AoE compared to Pyroblast based AoE is that Flamestrike does not contribute to Hot Streak, and that means in between every spender during combustion we need to spend 2 spells to get Hot Streak rather than just 1. So to start off, we're going to want the shifting power in the middle of our combustion to make up for this. So we're going to cast 2 Fire Blasts and a Flamestrike. We're going to use our 3rd Fire Blast and a Phoenix Flames for our 2nd Flamestrike. We're then going to shifting power to get as much of that back as possible, and then we're going to be using Fire Blasts and Phoenix Flames to get as many Flame Strikes into our combustion as possible. You will inevitably get less Flame Strikes into a combustion than you would Pyroblast for this reason, but it is what it is. One thing that you can do is, because you can cast Combustion while casting, is to start off with a hard cast Flame Strike and then activate Combustion during the cast to just get 1 extra Flame Strike. So I'll just show you an example of that. Okay, gearing and stat priority. Stat priority, Intellect's your best, then Haste, Mastery, Verse, and Crit. Haste and Mastery are your 2 most important stats. Haste is the thing that makes Fire Mage tick. It gives you the most single target damage. It reduces the cooldown of Fire Blast, which in turn gives you more combustions because of kindling. It gives you more Sun King's Blessings. It gives you more field of burn up time. It gives you everything. Mastery and Versatility are quite close in single target, but the thing is that Mastery gets a lot better on AoE because of the extra Ignite damage. Now, despite giving extra Ignite damage, I still put it 2nd on AoE. I think the stat priority is exactly the same on single target and AoE. The reason for that is, 1, your Ignite damage still scales off your single target damage, so the more damage you do to the main target, the more that gets spread. You get a significant amount of free Mastery because of Feel the Burn, and more haste is more Feel the Burn uptime because it's less Fire Blast cooldown. So even though Mastery increases your Ignite damage, yes, haste does a lot of other things that basically also increase your Ignite damage while being better on single target. So I recommend haste even in dungeons and on AoE. As for embellishments and crafted gear, your 2 best embellishments are going to be Elemental Lariat and any item with the embellishment that increases the duration of potions. Good items to craft are the engineering bracers, but you can put this embellishment on anything, so usually whatever your worst slot is. If you don't have access to good mythic tier in the shoulder slot, then the Amos embellishment that has the arcane damage proc on shoulders is also very, very good. So as for trinkets, unlike for other specs, a lot of trinkets for Fire Mage right now are kind of crap. But you always want to combo 1 active trinket and 1 passive trinket because active trinkets share a cooldown. The best active trinkets are Desperate Invoker's Codex and Chill Globe from the raid. The best passive trinkets are Furious Rage Feather from Knockout Offensive and Whispering Incarnate Icon from the raid. Because there are so many different trinkets available at so many different item levels, you cannot use lists like this to accurately compare trinkets. I always recommend that you go to raid boss and you sim yourself using top gear whenever you're comparing trinkets, and use Draw Optimizer for targeting trinkets that you want to try and get from content. Okay, I'm just going to show a quick 2-minute video of me executing the rotation from the opener in a moment. Before I do, I would just like to thank you all for watching. I'm pretty new to doing guides, so any feedback would be appreciated. If you enjoyed, do like, comment, subscribe, all that bullshit. I do stream on Twitch as well. It's just twitch.tv/ToeGrinder. I'll link it in the description. My UI is available in the description as well. I don't charge that. You don't need a sub, but if you do, thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.